The story of the B-21 Raider does not begin with a new airplane, but with an uncomfortable realization inside the U.S. defense establishment. By the early 2000s, the United States possessed the most advanced bomber fleet in the world, yet it was also aging, limited in size, and increasingly vulnerable to the future it was meant to deter. The B-52 Stratofortress, a symbol of Cold War endurance, was reliable but technologically outdated. The B-1B Lancer offered speed and payload, but lacked stealth. The B-2 Spirit, revolutionary in design, remained extraordinarily capable, but also extremely rare. Only 21 B-2 bombers were ever built. Each was immensely expensive, complex to maintain, and irreplaceable in strategic planning. The U.S. Air Force understood a hard truth. A force so small could not be risked freely in a future conflict against a peer adversary. At the same time, global military technology was changing. Potential rivals were investing heavily in long-range sensors, integrated air defense systems, and anti-access strategies designed specifically to challenge American power projection. The United States had built the B-2 to penetrate Soviet air defenses that no longer existed. But new threats were emerging, different in structure, broader in scope, and increasingly networked. The question facing planners was no longer whether the U.S. needed a stealth bomber, but whether the existing bomber force could survive the next generation of warfare. By the late 2000s, discussions began quietly within the Pentagon about the future of long-range strike. The goal was not simply to replace aging aircraft, but to rethink the role of bombers altogether. In earlier eras, bombers had been designed primarily as delivery platforms for nuclear weapons. Over time, they evolved into tools for conventional precision strikes. Now, they were expected to operate in environments saturated with sensors, missiles, cyber threats, and space-based surveillance. This shift required a new approach. Any future bomber would need to be stealthy, not just against radar, but across multiple spectrums. It would need to integrate seamlessly with satellites, intelligence networks, and other aircraft. It would need to be adaptable, capable of evolving through software and systems upgrades rather than costly structural redesigns. And perhaps most importantly, it would need to be affordable enough to be built in meaningful numbers. From these requirements emerged the concept known as Long-Range Strike Bomber, or LRS-B. Unlike the B-2 program, which had been shaped by Cold War urgency and near-unlimited budgets, LRS-B was conceived under fiscal restraint. Cost discipline became a central pillar of the program from the very beginning. The Air Force emphasized that the new bomber must avoid the mistakes of past acquisition efforts, over-customization, excessive complexity, and spiraling expenses. The philosophy behind the future bomber was clear: fewer miracles, more reliability. Instead of pushing unproven technologies to their limits, designers would leverage mature systems wherever possible. Stealth would remain essential, but it would be paired with modularity and maintainability. The aircraft would be designed not as a one-time marvel, but as a platform capable of continuous evolution. By the early 2010s, the concept had matured enough to move toward competition. The program was intentionally kept low profile. Unlike earlier high-visibility projects, the Air Force avoided dramatic public announcements. This was not an aircraft meant to inspire awe at air shows. It was meant to exist quietly in the background of strategic planning, shaping adversary calculations through uncertainty rather than spectacle. In 2015, after a competitive process, Northrop Grumman was selected as the prime contractor. The choice was not accidental. Northrop Grumman had built the B-2 Spirit and retained unique experience in flying wing stealth design. While details of the competition remained classified, the decision signaled continuity rather than reinvention. The future bomber would build upon lessons learned decades earlier, refined for a new strategic era. Shortly after the contract award, the aircraft received its official designation, B-21 Raider. The name carried historical weight. Raider echoed the Doolittle raid of World War II, a symbol of long-range strike and strategic daring. The implication was clear. The B-21 was intended not merely as a successor to existing bombers, but as the centerpiece of future American global strike capability. From the outset, the B-21 was described as both a conventional and nuclear platform. This dual-role mission underscored its strategic importance. It would serve as a critical component of the U.S. nuclear triad, while also providing flexible options for conventional deterrence and, if necessary, combat. Unlike earlier bombers that were often specialized over time, the B-21 was designed from the ground up to handle both missions seamlessly. What distinguished the B-21 concept most sharply from its predecessors was scale. The Air Force made clear that it intended to procure a significantly larger fleet than the B-2. While exact numbers remained classified or deliberately vague, the intent was unmistakable. The B-21 was to be used, not merely preserved. It would be affordable enough to fly regularly, train extensively, and operate forward when required. As development moved forward, public information remained sparse. No detailed images were released. No performance figures were confirmed. This absence fueled speculation, but it also reflected a deliberate strategy. In an era of ubiquitous surveillance and open-source intelligence, secrecy itself became a tool of deterrence. The less known about the B-21, the harder it would be for potential adversaries to counter it. By the end of the 2010s, the B-21 existed primarily as an idea backed by quiet confidence. It represented a return to the bomber as a central element of American power, not as a relic of past wars, but as a solution to future ones. Yet many questions remained unanswered. How advanced was the design? How close was it to flight? And how would it fit into a world increasingly shaped by drones, cyber warfare, and space-based systems? Those questions would define the next phase of the B-21 story, as the aircraft moved from concept toward reality, and from secrecy toward cautious revelation. As the B-21 Raider program moved deeper into development, its defining feature remained deliberate restraint. In contrast to earlier bomber programs that revealed prototypes early or relied on public demonstrations, the B-21 advanced almost entirely behind closed doors. This approach reflected a shift in how the United States viewed strategic deterrence in the 21st century. Power no longer needed to be constantly displayed. In many cases, uncertainty itself became more effective. Throughout the late 2010s, official statements about the B-21 were carefully limited. Senior Air Force leaders confirmed progress without disclosing technical specifics. What became clear, however, was the philosophy guiding the aircraft's design. The B-21 was not intended to be a technological gamble. Instead of chasing extreme performance metrics, it was built around survivability, reliability, and adaptability. Every design choice was shaped by the expectation that the aircraft would operate for decades in an environment defined by rapid technological change. One of the most significant aspects of the B-21 program was its emphasis on digital engineering. Unlike earlier bombers, which required extensive physical prototyping, the Raider was designed largely in a virtual environment. Advanced modeling and simulation allowed engineers to test systems, maintenance procedures, and upgrades long before the first aircraft was assembled. This approach reduced risk and shortened development timelines, addressing one of the major shortcomings of past acquisition programs. By the early 2020s, it became increasingly evident that the B-21 was intended to serve as more than a replacement for aging bombers. It was conceived as the core of a broader long-range strike ecosystem. Rather than operating alone, the Raider would function as part of a network that included satellites, intelligence assets, cyber capabilities, and unmanned systems. In this role, the bomber would not simply deliver weapons, but also collect and distribute information, shaping the battlespace before and after a strike. Public attention intensified in December 2022, when the B-21 Raider was officially unveiled. The event marked the first time the aircraft was shown to the world, though still under tightly controlled conditions. The revealed design confirmed long-standing assumptions: a flying wing configuration optimized for low observability, with smooth surfaces and minimal protrusions. While many details remained hidden, the unveiling signaled that the program had crossed a critical threshold. From concept to physical reality. Following the unveiling, testing became the next focus. Ground tests and systems evaluations were conducted to validate the aircraft's performance and integration. The Air Force emphasized that flight testing would be deliberate and methodical. This caution reflected lessons learned from earlier programs, where aggressive schedules often led to costly setbacks. The B-21 was not rushed. Its value lay in long-term effectiveness rather than early headlines. Throughout this phase, comparisons with the B-2 Spirit were inevitable. While the two aircraft shared a similar configuration, their roles diverged in important ways. The B-2 had been a product of Cold War urgency, designed to penetrate Soviet defenses with minimal warning. The B-21, by contrast, was shaped by a multipolar world. It was expected to operate against diverse threats, adapt to evolving technologies, and remain relevant even as warfare expanded into cyber and space domains. The Raider's role within the nuclear triad further underscored its strategic importance. As land-based missiles and submarine-launched systems continued to evolve, the bomber leg remained uniquely flexible. Unlike ballistic missiles, bombers can be deployed visibly, recalled if necessary, and adjusted in response to changing political conditions. The B-21 was designed to preserve and enhance this flexibility, ensuring that the United States retained credible, controllable deterrence options. Despite growing public awareness, the B-21 had not participated in combat or military operations by this stage. This absence was expected. Strategic bombers are not developed for frequent use, but for the rare scenarios where their presence can alter the balance of power. The Raider's primary contribution during this period was psychological and strategic, rather than kinetic. Its existence forced potential adversaries to account for a capability that was difficult to detect, difficult to track, and difficult to counter. Cost control remained a central theme throughout development. Unlike previous programs that saw dramatic cost escalation, the B-21 benefited from tighter requirements and a more disciplined acquisition strategy. While exact figures were not publicly disclosed in detail, the Air Force consistently emphasized that affordability was non-negotiable. This focus was essential to achieving the goal of building the bomber in sufficient numbers to matter strategically. As testing continued and production planning advanced, the B-21 increasingly came to be viewed as the future backbone of U.S. bomber forces. It was intended not to replace existing aircraft overnight, but to gradually assume a larger share of the long-range strike mission as older platforms were retired. In this transitional period, the Raider symbolized continuity rather than disruption, an evolution of American air power rather than a sudden break from the past. By the mid-2020s, the B-21 stood at a pivotal moment. It was no longer merely a secretive concept, yet it was not fully operational. Its shape had been revealed, its purpose clarified, and its strategic role increasingly understood. What remained uncertain was how it would ultimately perform in an era defined by rapid technological competition and shifting geopolitical realities. Those questions would shape the final chapter of the B-21 story. The aircraft's true significance would depend not only on its design, but on how it was integrated into doctrine, alliances, and future conflict planning. As the Raider moved closer to operational service, it would test whether the lessons learned from decades of bomber development had truly been absorbed. By the mid-2020s, the B-21 Raider had reached a stage that few military aircraft ever do before entering service. It had already reshaped strategic thinking without firing a single weapon. In many ways, this outcome reflected the aircraft's true purpose. The B-21 was never meant to be defined by combat footage or battlefield statistics. It was designed to influence decisions long before conflict begins. As flight testing progressed, the U.S. Air Force continued to emphasize caution and discipline. Unlike past programs that rushed aircraft into operational status, the Raider followed a deliberately measured path. This approach acknowledged a hard lesson learned over decades of procurement failures. Strategic systems gain value from reliability and predictability, not speed to headlines. Every phase of testing was intended to validate not only performance, but long-term sustainability. By 2025, the B-21 had not participated in combat, exercises, or forward deployments. This fact often led to misunderstanding outside professional defense circles. Yet for strategic bombers, absence from war is not a weakness. It is evidence that deterrence is working. The B-21's mission is not to fight frequent wars, but to ensure that certain wars never happen at all. At the core of the Raider's design is adaptability. Unlike earlier bombers that required major structural modifications to accept new weapons or sensors, the B-21 was built with modularity in mind. Software-driven upgrades allow capabilities to evolve over time without redesigning the aircraft itself. This approach mirrors broader trends in modern warfare, where software increasingly determines effectiveness as much as hardware. The Raider's role within U.S. strategy became clearer as global competition intensified. Against peer adversaries, the ability to hold targets at risk from long range remains a cornerstone of deterrence. The B-21 provides a survivable means of doing so, even in environments saturated with advanced air defenses. Its stealth characteristics are intended not merely to evade radar, but to complicate enemy planning across multiple domains. Equally important is how the B-21 fits into alliances. While the aircraft itself is not an export platform, its presence strengthens Allied confidence in U.S. extended deterrence. For allies in Europe and the Indo-Pacific, the Raider represents a tangible commitment to collective defense. It reassures partners that the United States retains credible options to respond to the most extreme threats, even as warfare becomes more complex. Another defining feature of the B-21 program is scale. Unlike the B-2, which was constrained by cost and limited numbers, the Raider was designed to be built in quantities sufficient to matter. This shift reflects an understanding that deterrence depends not only on technological superiority, but on resilience. A force that can absorb losses and continue operating presents a far more credible challenge to any adversary. The B-21 also symbolizes a broader transition in how the United States approaches AirPower. Rather than focusing on single-purpose platforms, modern doctrine emphasizes systems of systems. The Raider is expected to operate alongside unmanned aircraft, space-based sensors, cyber capabilities, and conventional forces. In this ecosystem, the bomber is both a shooter and a sensor, a command node as much as a delivery platform. Critically, the Raider was designed with the future in mind, rather than a specific enemy. While much discussion centers on competition with China and Russia, the B-21's value lies in its flexibility. It is built to adapt to threats that may not yet be fully understood. This forward-looking approach distinguishes it from earlier aircraft that were optimized for specific historical contexts. By 2025, the B-21 Raider stands as one of the most significant military aviation programs of the modern era, not because of what it has done, but because of what it represents. It embodies a return to long-range strike as a central pillar of strategy, updated for a world defined by information warfare, precision, and global connectivity. Looking back, The Raider's development reflects a rare moment of institutional learning. The program avoided many of the excesses that plagued earlier efforts. Requirements were restrained, technology choices were deliberate, and secrecy was used as a strategic tool rather than a marketing device. In doing so, the B-21 demonstrated that evolution, not revolution, often produces the most enduring results. The story of the B-21 Raider is ultimately a story about time. It is an aircraft built not for today's headlines, but for decades of quiet service ahead. Its impact will not be measured by the number of missions flown in its early years, but by how long it remains relevant in an uncertain future. As of 2025, the B-21 Raider has not yet written its combat history, but it has already written something equally important: a statement about how the United States intends to project power, deter conflict, and adapt to a rapidly changing world. In that sense, the Raider truly earns its title, the bomber of the future, designed not to dominate the past, but to endure whatever comes next.